So there's been increased speculation that Kubrat Pulev will face Anthony Joshua. Lots of rumours flying around today that this fight is very much on its way to being made. There's one Facebook boxing page claiming it's almost a done deal. I won't mention the source because I'm not 100% sure it's the most reliable. But regardless, seems that this fight is looking more and more likely. And I need to stress at the start of this video that this fight certainly hasn't been confirmed. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to discuss my thoughts on the potential matchup and discuss how I think it could potentially go if it were to be made. Potentially this could be 10 minutes wasted if it then isn't made, but nevertheless I'll try and enjoy the discussion regardless. Let me start by saying that whilst the fight isn't confirmed, I can see Kubrat Pulev as a definite maybe. I thought that Eddie Hearn may be taking Joshua out to the States, but with recent interviews with Eddie Hearn, that seemed less likely. He's talked about doing it in Manchester or Scotland, so it does seem to be a UK-based fight, UK-based opponent, and that certainly means the likes of the Jarrell Millers, the Andy Ruizes, the Eric Molina are of less interest. You know, not saying that those guys are ruled out, but I think their chances would have been dramatically increased. If they'd fought in the US, for example, I do think they'd need a US opponent to really market it. If we look at the other options, Joseph Parker, I think he's out of the running for the Joshua fight in November, because I think it's too close to his Dimitrenko matchup. But Main Stavern appears to be going down the WBC title route for a fight against Alexander Povetkin, so he's potentially out of the running. Hughie Fury's potentially out of the running due to his UK anti-doping situation where he has a hearing in November. And Eddie Hearn has pretty much come out and actually ruled out David Price himself and saying he thinks David Price needs to have a bit of a big win before the fight. So, you know, looking Derek Chisora, we don't expect to be in the running either because he's looking at fighting Dillian Whyte. So going down the list and looking at the options, you can actually rule out a number of them. And because of that, Kubrat Pulev is a definite maybe. Johan Depar is another maybe. There's a few names out there, but Kubrat Pulev, I guess, is one of the more likely possibilities. I noticed that Ingram Jones on Bayloric did an interview with Peter Fury. That's a very good interview, by the way, so do check it out if you're interested. And Peter Fury talked about Kubrat Pulev being made an offer to fight Hughie Fury and said that the Sauerlands and Team Pulev turned it down because they had another opportunity elsewhere. So that may or may not have been the Joshua opportunity. Certainly we know the Sauerland brothers and Eddie Hearn are very close. Obviously the Sauerlands have the likes of David Price, George Groves, Anthony Ogogo even, and those guys have all been on Sky. So there's clearly a very good relationship. There's been lots of cross-promotional fights before. Paul Smith and Martin Murray versus Arthur Abraham, Jürgen Bremer versus Nathan Cleverly. Clearly, they're on good terms. And wouldn't surprise me if Kubrat Pulev is the next opponent for Anthony Joshua. So let's discuss Kubrat Pulev. Kubrat Pulev, solid guy, definite top 10 heavyweight. Real solid amateur background. And you can still see that in the way he fights today. Lots of movement, quite light on his feet for a big guy. Everything comes off the jab. One of the best jabbers in the heavyweight division. Not necessarily a power battering ram jab like Vladimir Klitschko's, but a constant, accurate weapon, point-scoring weapon that can break down an opponent. Pulev's got a decent resume. Wins over Tony Thompson, Derek Chisora, Ustinov, Dimitrenko, and he's shown he can handle big guys. It's actually impressive. For Kubrat Pulev to be an outside jabber, to go out and beat guys like Dimitrenko and Ustinov and Thompson, who are also guys who work off the jab but are a lot bigger than you, is impressive. And I yet again was impressed by Kubrat Pulev in his performance against Derek Chisora. I thought Chisora may be able to cause him problems, but Kubrat Pulev really was on form that night and won quite widely on my scorecard, certainly. I know one of the judges bizarrely ruled it a split decision or a draw or something like that. But yeah, Kubrat Pulev for me was on form that night and on point. I do see him as a poor man's Vladimir Klitschko. He throws everything off the jab. He's not the most versatile. He's not the most skilled on the inside. He doesn't punch to the body. He is a guy who works off long straight punches and then looks to hold on the inside. He's jab and grab. But he's not as good as Vladimir Klitschko because he doesn't have the power that Vladimir Klitschko has, and he doesn't have the size that Vladimir Klitschko has. So I do view him as a slightly poor man's Vladimir Klitschko. Having said that, Vladimir Klitschko is a fighter who reigned supreme for the best part of a decade. So if you're going to be a poor man's something, it's probably a good idea to be a poor man's Vladimir Klitschko. And calling him a poor man's fighter may be harsh because Kubrat Pulev is very, very, very good. And I'd pick him over the majority of the top 20 fighters in the world right now. What he doesn't have is the tremendous game-changing power. He doesn't have the ability to sit on someone's chest and wear them down on the inside. He's probably not going to bust you up to the body. That's not really his thing. But is he going to stand there? Is he going to move around you? Is he going to jab you from range? Is he going to pick at you and frustrate you? Most certainly. I guess the major concern with Kubrat Pulev is potentially his durability. The only time he's been up against a major puncher, and guys like Derek Chisora, Tony Thompson, these aren't major punchers in the context of the heavyweight division. The only time he's been up against a major puncher was Vladimir Klitschko. And Vladimir Klitschko was able to hurt him with regularity. And that's certainly something to note going up against Anthony Joshua potentially. Because if Joshua can catch Kubrat Pulev, he will be confident he can hurt him based on that footage of the Vladimir Klitschko fight. He will be very, very confident. And it's interesting. In many ways, first, one thing I should say is this is a good fight. This is a fight that I would support. This is a fight I would look forward to seeing. And I'd actually give Hearn and Joshua major credit for taking this fight. It's a real step up. Pulev is a lot better than Dillian Whyte, Charles Martin and Dominic Breazeale. He's a level above those guys. He's not quite the levels of the Luis Ortizes and Furies and Hayes and Wilders and those sort of guys. But he's one notch below those, and he's certainly, for me, a level above the Dillian Whytes and the Dominic Breazeales of this world. So I'd applaud them for taking the fight. Having said that, the danger that Kubrat Pulev causes is predictable. I don't think Pulev is going to one-punch knock out Joshua. I don't think Pulev's going to get on the inside and, grind him down. I don't think Pulev's going to relentlessly attack the body. The danger that Kubrat Pulev causes Joshua is if Kubrat Pulev can outmaneuver Joshua, out-jab Joshua, and outpoint Joshua. And we know it's going to be very hard to outpoint Joshua at the O2. It's not going to be at the O2, is it? But we know it's going to be very hard to get a decision against Anthony Joshua with his current place in the market. Also, with Joshua being such an eye-catching, snappy, hard puncher, it's actually going to be hard to outpoint him through legitimate means either, because he is going to be... it's hard. You're going to have to land a lot of punches on him. You're going to have to land eye-catching punches to win rounds when you know he's going to be throwing heavy leather. So it's an interesting fight. Interesting. I look forward to it if it does happen. But for me, Kubrat Pulev's only chance in the fight is if he can do something that we haven't seen anyone do to Joshua before and completely outbox him. Essentially implement that amateur game and almost try and move around Joshua, establish the jab and put him in his box early on. And if he does that, it would be an interesting fight. It would also be an interesting fight if he was able to remain elusive, staying on the outside and trying to win rounds on the back foot and bringing Joshua into that late part of fights. Joshua hasn't been to the championship rounds so far in his career. Kubrat Pulev is a guy who has gone late in fights before. He's went the distance on several occasions. And with Joshua's untested stamina and the suggestion that he may not have the best gas tank given his physique and the way he fights, where he expends a lot of energy through power punching, it would be interesting to see if Kubrat Pulev could take him late. So those are the two chances for Pulev. One is the stamina option. Two is the sort of outboxing, out-jabbing option, which would be really, really interesting. Really interesting to see if he adopts that idea. He's going to have to be careful, because I imagine Joshua will be a slightly bigger man with slightly longer reach. And he's going to have to be careful that he doesn't remain too stationary. In the Vladimir Klitschko fight, Pulev gave up a lot of his natural advantages by really sort of planting roots almost like a tree and standing there stiff and upright. And if he does that with Joshua, he's in big trouble, because his advantage over Joshua may be that sort of back foot movement amateur boxing game, and I think that's what he's got to look to implement early on and try and frustrate Joshua and drag him into the later rounds and try and steal rounds behind a jab, which is what he's best served at doing. Who's the favourite to win the fight? It's Anthony Joshua. He's the more eye-catching puncher, he's the harder puncher. You would imagine there's a much higher chance of Joshua knocking Pulev out, given potential fragility that was shown from Pulev in the Klitschko fight, than there is of Pulev knocking Joshua out. Pulev, for me, just isn't really an elite level puncher. You know, he didn't look like knocking out Derek Chisora when Chisora recently took him the distance, for example. But it's an interesting fight. It's a real step up for Anthony Joshua. It's a different style for Anthony Joshua, and it will see where he's at. It would be the biggest win of his career by far, and it would also be interesting to assess his boxing skills. A lot of Anthony Joshua's opponents have been lesser technical boxers. Guys like Dillian White, a bit sloppy technically. Guys like Dominic Breazeale, very stiff, very upright, very plodding. Let's see how Joshua fares against an elite technician boxer. Let's say Kubrat Pulev schools him for 4 or 5 rounds and then gets knocked out. That would be very revealing. Let's say it's a very close fight and Pulev is able to land a jab with regularity and expose some defensive frailties. Again, that would be very revealing. And we don't really know how it's going to go because we haven't really seen Joshua fight a moving, jabbing boxer. Certainly not on the level of Kubrat Pulev. So I'd applaud the fight. I'd look forward to the fight. I'd make Joshua a favourite. I think Pulev's got those 2 ways of winning it. But memories of him being hurt and dropped and stopped by Vladimir Klitschko do make me think that it's a winnable fight for Anthony Joshua. Let me know your thoughts, people. Comment below. Do you like the fight? How do you see the fight going? Is Pulev the opponent you'd pick? Do you think the fight's even going to happen? If you've enjoyed this video and the discussion, please hit the thumbs up button. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so before. I'd really appreciate that. Many thanks for watching, guys.